Perek Rishon. Last week we went through the Perek quickly, and we learned that a person has two neshamas. He has a lower neshama and an upper neshama. The lower neshama is Nefesh HaBahamis, the upper neshama is the Nefesh Al-Yoina. The lower neshama basically takes care of all human functions. Anything that's physically measurable, anything that we can notice in our life functions is performed by the power of the Nefesh HaBahamis, the lower neshama. The upper neshama, we learned, is divided up into 5 subsections, and the upper neshama has one tachlis and one tachlis only, and that is, in order to connect a person to the koiches and shamayim, so that his actions, his mitzvahs in this world should have an effect upstairs where it counts, and in turn, to create not only an effect from down here leading upstairs, but that conduit that the neshama creates also allows shefa, bracha, to come down from upstairs down into his neshama, down into him. The neshama el-yoina, the higher soul, cannot be felt, it cannot be sensed, it cannot be noticed in your body. Anybody that says that they feel their neshama, their upper neshama, it's psychosomatic, it's not true. And the upper neshama is connected to the lower neshama is connected to the body by way of the dam, the blood. And what comes out is that a person's guf and his two neshamas are linked together such that the effect of the guf is able to cause an effect in the upper neshama, and vice versa. The upper neshama that's connected to upstairs is able to bring down bracha and shefa all the way down into the guf through it. And now we're going to learn the Perek slowly. Chelek Gimel Perek Rishon, Binyan HaNefesh U'Puloi Seha, about the neshama, or the nefesh, and its actions. Hine, Kvan is Boyer B'Chelek Aleph Perek Gimel, we already explained previously. Inyan HaAdam, the idea of the human being. Shenimtza Boy, Mashaloi Nimtza B'Shum Nivra Acher, that a human being has what no other creation has. Dahainu, namely, haharkova, a mixture, a blendedness. Shenir kvu boy, shnei mitziyuyos rechoikim v'nivdolim zemizeh. There were joined or mixed in him two entities that are very far from each other, very separate from each other, and very different from each other. The human being is a combination of haguf v'haneshama, the body and the soul. V'zeh, and this means to say, number 1, ki hine yesh ba'odom mitzius nefesh k'mo sheyesh l'chol balei chayim. A human being has a spiritual component, just like all other living creatures do. Mishameshes lahargosha v'haskola hachakuka b'tivoi. It controls the feelings and the intellect that's contained in the nature of a person. So, we are talking here about the lower neshama, the Nefesh HaBahamis. And the first thing the Ramchal says is that this lower neshama is shared not only by human beings, but by other living creatures as well. And before we begin, we need to understand that in the Torah, plants are not living things. In science class in elementary school, they teach you plants are living things. In the Torah, they're not living. There's Doimim Seimeach Chaim Medaber. The world is comprised of 4 types of things. Doimim is rocks, metals, totally inanimate objects. They don't grow. They just sit and do nothing. Seimeach are growing objects, but they're not living. Those are plants and trees. Chai are living creatures. That's animals, fish, birds, and humans. And Medaber is a subcategory of Chai. Those are human beings. Jews and Goyim are all both in the category of Medaber. Now, it's true, it happens to be there's Yushalmi that says the reason why in Arava, Daled Minim, an Arava that's dried out is Posel. Yushalmi learns it out from Pasuk, Loi HaMesim Yahalaluka. But it doesn't literally mean that Arava, Daled Minim are alive. They're not considered Chayim. Chayim are only animals. And with that, let's go back to the Ramchal. Ki hine yesh ba'odo metzius nefesh. A human being has a spiritual element. K'mo sheyesh l'kol balei chayim. First we have to understand what the word nefesh means. The word nefesh does not mean soul. The word neshama doesn't really mean soul either. But the words that we're going to be coming across here, nefesh, ruach, neshama, we're going to see them used in many different ways. In fact, I have to tell you that sometimes when a pasuk will use the word ruach, the Chazal, when they quote the pasuk, they're going to substitute for ruach the word nefesh. We're going to see that shortly. They're interchangeable to a large extent. But when we're dealing with the literal meaning of the words, and we're going to try to stick to that here for clarity's sake, nefesh means a koyach. Nefesh means an ability, a strength. Any ability that something has that is added to the physical makeup of a thing is called its nefesh. Natural forces of nature are called nefoshois. There's nefesh hatzoimeches, the soul or the nefesh, the power of the trees, the growing things. It's not really a soul, but it's a power that they have. The physical makeup isn't the power that makes them grow. The power that makes them grow is something super added to the physical makeup, and so it's called a nefesh. Nefesh hatenua, the nefesh of movement, means the power of movement. Animals have a nefesh hatenua. The Rishonim say this, that when we say that Hashem gave to a person various nefoshois, we could substitute the phrase various koichos. The Lashon of the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, he says, Koyach yitein hanefesh hatzoimeches l'kol tzoimeach, Koyach yitein hanefesh hachaya l'kol chai, v'koyach yitein hadavri l'kol medaber. A nefesh, all it means is a power. It's a natural ability, natural power. And so what the Pasuk says regarding a person, Vayhi ha'odom l'nefesh chaya, it means that with the addition of the nefesh, there was nothing added to the guf of the person. There was nothing added to the substance of the person, the physical part of the person. The only thing that was added to him was the koyach hachayim. And any koyach that's added to the chomer, to the physical part, is called a nefesh. In fact, the Zohar HaKadosh says that the pasuk in Koheles, anything that you can do with your strength, do. Or, there's another way to read the pasuk. Anything that you can do it with your strength. Depends where you put the comma. The Zohar HaKadosh says that the translation of the word koyach there, koichacha, means your neshama. And so, a human being has a life force, a life power, that's shared by all animals. Mishameshes lahargosha v'haskola, It controls feeling and intellect, hachakuka b'tivoi, that's in the nature of the human being and the animal. Now, even though that a human being and an animal share a neshama, or a nefesh, we're going to call it a nefesh habahamis, the nefesh habahamis of a human being is considered higher than the nefesh habahamis of an animal. Even though they're both totally animal spirits or animal souls. There are two reasons for this. Number one, there's the svara of the Ralbag, where he says that the nefesh hatzoimeches, the growth force that we have in plants, also exists in live creatures. Live creatures also have a nefesh hatzoimeches. They have a nefesh habahamis on top of that, but the growth is caused by the nefesh hatzoimeches. The nefesh hatzoimeches in the animals is a higher level than the nefesh hatzoimeches in the plants. The reason is because the nefesh hatzoimeches in the animals is a contributor to the entire nefesh habahamis. It's a contributor to the entire whole. And when when an entity becomes a contributor to a greater entity, it itself is considered elevated. He says, Moshe Lamar Davadomi, you have a door. There's a door of a house, front door to the house, and you have a door sitting in the lumber yard. The door to the house is considered, even though they're both doors, the door to the house is considered a higher entity than the door that's laying in the lumber yard, because it serves the purpose of helping the house. And so the nefesh hatzoimeches of an animal serves the purpose of being part of the animal, of making the animal grow, which is a higher task than making an animal grow. The second reason is that the nefesh habahamis of a human being is totally different than the nefesh habahamis of an animal. Both of them are made of physical things. This nefesh is not really a spiritual entity, it's a physical entity. We're going to see it's made up of physical stuff, but very, very subtle, intangible physical stuff. And the Arizal writes that the nefesh habahamis of a person is made up in a way of the same materials as nefesh habahamis of an animal, but on a higher level of those materials. It's made up of higher stuff than nefesh habahamis of the animals. So even though the Ramchal said that human beings share with animals the nefesh habahamis, a lower soul, we'll call it, nevertheless, the nefesh habahamis of a human being is higher than the nefesh habahamis of an animal. Now, just like we learned last week that the higher neshama of a person is divided up into 5 parts, the lower neshama, the nefesh habahamis, is also divided up into parts, is divided up into 3 parts. We're going to discuss those 3 parts right now. One is called the nefesh hamarkeves. The soul, and I'm using the word soul loosely, the force or the spirit that keeps something together. This is the soul, we'll call it, of the domain. It's the soul of the rocks and the soul of the earth. It's the soul of the metals and the minerals. It keeps things together. And we'll go into it in a moment. The second is the nefesh hatzoimeches. There are those that call it the nefesh hativis. That's the spirit, the soul of plants and trees, things that grow. The third is the nefesh habahamis. There are those that call it also the nefesh hachiyuni, and that's the nefesh that all living creatures have. Now, the nefesh hatzoimeches also includes the nefesh hamarkeves, because if the plant or the leaf dries up, it remains a domain. It's like a stick or a stone. All the nefashos, any nefesh contains within it all the lower nefashos under it. So the nefesh habahamis includes also nefesh hatzoimeches and nefesh hamarkeves. the nefesh hatzomeches contains also a nefesh hamarkeves. Now, the nefesh hamarkeves, there's a machloikis if it's actually a spiritual entity at all, or even a nefesh. The nefesh hamarkeves, what it does is, it's the nefesh of the rocks, it's the spiritual or the non-physical, the intangible part of the rocks, the metals, minerals. What it does is, it's the force that holds it together. These things are made up of little particles, very, very little particles, and I'm not saying it's molecules, I'm not saying it's atoms, I don't know at what level these particles exist, but however they exist, it's held together by something called the nefesh hatzomeches. And not everybody holds, the Ramban brings the machloikis, whether the nefesh hatzomeches is really considered a nefesh or not. Remember, as a mashal, you can create a robot that moves, that jumps, maybe even that grows, based upon the physical entity. And it grows. It'll look like it'll grow. I'll tell you what the robot will do. The robot will eat. You'll put water in it, and you'll put stones in it, and you'll put sticks in it. And internally it will take that, it will process the stuff that it put in and make itself grow. But it's all a physical process. It's not a process that you would attribute to a nefesh. So, the fact that a rock sticks together doesn't necessarily mean that there's a nefesh force that's doing it. So there's a machloikis if a nefesh hamarkeves is actually a nefesh. The nefesh hatzomeches, the same thing. There are more people that hold that the nefesh hatzomeches is a nefesh, but also there are those that say that the nefesh hatzomeches is a purely physical and tangible function, kind of like a robot that grows. What the plants do is they take the sunlight and process it. They take the water and process it. They take the minerals from the earth and process it, mix it up a bit, and using some kind of machinery, some internal machinery, it uses that. A computer could do that. A robot could do that to make itself grow. Now, that may be a non-physical force that's doing it, kind of like a soul, or it may be it's the same as a robot. Everybody agrees, as I mentioned before, that plants in Torah perspective are not living things, as opposed to what we learned in elementary school. They're not living things. They're growing things. And there's a machloikis whether the nefesh of the tzomeach is actually a nefesh, means that there's some kind of spiritual or intangible physical entity that's superimposed on the actual cells and mass of the trees, or whether it's just some robotic-like creature, some robotic-like creation that causes itself to grow by processing the physical things that are put inside it. The Ramban brings these two shittas, and the Ramban says, he refers to it as the Das Yevonim, the Greek, the opinion of the Greeks, that the ability to grow in the plant kingdom is also considered a nefesh. And according to them, the words nefesh chaya in the Torah doesn't mean that all nefesh is chayim. It means nefesh chaya. Chaya would be an adjective saying this nefesh is a nefesh of life as opposed to a nefesh at tzomeach that wouldn't be a nefesh of life. It would be a nefesh of growth. The Ramban brings other dayas like that, and the Rabbeinu Bachai brings both dayas too. That's the nefesh hatzomeches. The nefesh habahamis, there's Ramban, and I'm going to quote him now. It's in Vayikra Perik Yud Zayin Pasuk Zayin. He says, quote, "V'da, and you should know, ki kasher habriya mitchila, maschila b'maisa bereishis beguf ha'odam ubechol balei hanefesh v'atzamochim v'hamatchos mi'arba yisoidos v'nischabru abosam b'koyach eloiki li yois mehem guf gas murgish v'chol chameshis ha'argoshois l'gasusoi." The creation of the world began with the putting together, the composition of all physical things. It started with human beings and animals, plants, and minerals being put together from the four yisoidus, the four elements. such that they're able, because of this, because they're put together the four elements, they're put together in a way that we're able to feel them, to taste them, to see them, to hear them. They are visible to all our senses. And the four elements, we know that even though, the chemists have a periodic table of the elements that have, I don't know how many elements there are these days, but in the Svarim there are four elements. In the periodic table of the elements, it contains four things. Eish, Mayim, Avir, and Adama. There's fire, water, air, and dirt. Everything in the world is comprised of those four things in some combination. Now this originates from the very, very, very early Svarim, and the Rishonim speak a lot about it, and says that the nature of a thing depends largely on the way these four elements are combined in it. Now, we have to understand that it doesn't literally mean fire, water, dirt, and air. A human being is composed of these four elements, and a human being doesn't have fire inside him. But it means the existential nature of fire, the heat of the fire. There's something about fire that we refer to as Eish. And there's something represented by Mayim that we refer to as Mayim. There's some type of force. These four forces, these four elements comprise everything in the world. And most of the things are combined by a combination of these four things in such a way that we could actually sense them. We could feel them. We could taste them. Says the Ramban, Kachoya Yitzira Mishnei Yisoidos. So too there was a creation that God made some things out of only two of these elements. Min ha'esh v'ha'avir. From fire and air. Now fire and air obviously are much less tangible than the water and the dirt. You can kind of feel air. Everybody knows that air, has weight. When I was a kid, we used to do this experiment where you would take a newspaper and you put a ruler under the newspaper, and half of the ruler would extend off the table, and the other 6 inches would be on the table, and there would be a newspaper on top, and you give the ruler a bang and it would break. It's not the weight of the newspaper that's causing the ruler to break, it's the weight of the air actually, the force of the air that's preventing the newspaper from rising up when you hit the other end of the ruler. So air is tangible, it's just it's not as tangible as rock. And fire also, it's tangible obviously, but not as much as water and dirt. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu made some creations out of Eish and Avir. V'hoya mehem guf einoi nirgish v'loi musig liachas min ha'argoshos. There's an actual body. There are physical things that are made up of only two of the four elements. You can't feel these. You can't see them. You can't hear them. And you can't taste them. Kasher nefesh habehema einen musegis lahargoshos dakusa. Like the nefesh habahamis, the soul, the physical soul, the animal soul, is not measurable, it's not tangible, it's not feelable. You can't sense it because of its intangible, its subtleness. V'haguf hazehu ruchni. It's not really gashmi, it's kind of spiritual, because it's made very sublime and very subtle out of Eish and Avir. And kasher ha'arkava b'chol dovar sibas ha'avaya v'ha'hefsid b'murkav mi'arba yisoidos, just like the cause of existence, of maintained existence of everything, is because of the way it's combined of the four elements. Kachi b'murkavim ha'elu mishnei yisoidos. So too, the things that are combined of two elements. Ki behischadrusam yihye bal ha'guf chai, u'behispordam yihye kemes. Just like the rock is a rock because these four elements are combined in the rock in such a way to make them a rock, so too, two elements combine to make these animal souls into animal souls, for instance. We know it says in the Svarim that the difference between a live person and a dead person is a live person has all his parts combined. A dead person has them separate. The Sfarim explain death very simply. It's kind of like salad dressing. You take salad dressing, right, has the oil and the vinegar, and you shake it up. You shake it up very, very hard. And now it combines. But it's only a matter of time before the oil and the vinegar separate again, right? It's the same thing with a human being. A human being is a combination of a body and a soul. And it's combined in such a way that a body and a soul aren't really things that go together. They're two separate things, and they try to separate from each other. But there's a force that combines them. But since there's constantly a counterforce to try to separate them, it's just a matter of time before the counterforce overcomes the force. The guf and the neshama separate because naturally they're supposed to be separated. It's only a synthetic, artificial situation that they're together, and that's what causes death. Life is the combination of the body and soul, and death is the natural state of the body and soul. Death is really natural because the body is where it belongs in the ground. The soul is where it belongs up by Hashem. If you put two unnatural things together, that's life, but it's not going to stay that way. Yeah?
Was not a Harishon supposed to live forever, but would he be one fate?
Well, Adam Harishon's body was different before the Chet. The relation between his body and soul was different. We're going to get to the chapter of Adam Harishon. Secondly, theoretically, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can, without a doubt, create a salad dressing that never separates.
Right.
Even though naturally it's supposed to, but the way...
That's a combination of body.
Right, but naturally, unless...
Harishon was natural.
Right, but, unless acted upon by some outside force, at least the bodies we have now, would just separate. Because the natural state of our bodies is not to be together. In fact, the Sfarim say that the natural state of everything is not to be together. Everything returns sooner or later to its roots. Everything decomposes and returns to its roots. And the body and the soul return to its roots. If you throw a rock up in the air, it'll sooner or later return to its roots on the ground because it's made up of ground. If you take air and you put it under the ground or under the water, unless it's being forced to stay there by something stronger than it will return to its roots. If you blow bubbles under the water, it's going to go up. If you're stuck under the water and it's dark and you don't know which way to swim, which way is up, that's what you do. You blow some air out of your mouth and you follow the bubbles. Because the bubbles always go up, back to the air. So too, the body and the soul always want to go back to their roots. And the nefesh habahamis is a physical thing. It's not made of something spiritual, let's say like Torah, or the nefesh ha'elyoina, which we're going to be discussing later. The nefesh habahamis, the animal soul of a person, is a very, very, very sublime, very intangible, physical thing. It's different than other physical things in that other physical things are combined of 4 elements, and the nefesh habahamis is only made out of 2. Let's continue in the Ramchal. Inyan ha-nefesh hazois b'chol balei hachayim. The idea of this soul that all animals, all living creatures have, hu metzius echad, dak ma'oid, it's very, very sublime. Nimshach ubo b'toich hazera acharehi koltoi. It is collected and placed inside the zera after the baby is conceived. That's what it means. V'hu atzmai mispashet v'hoylech. It spreads out. Uboinei es haguf, and it builds the body. Kefima shiroi lemin hahu, according to the nature of that particular species. V'chein mispashet b'his gadloi, and it spreads as the body grows. Uboi tolui hahergish, v'chein ha'askola ha'ru'uya lemin hahu. Because of this nefesh habahamis, the feelings, the emotions, and the intellect of all species, whatever is appropriate for the species, is created. Now, the first question is, it says nimshachu bo, it's collected and it goes into the zera. Where is it collected from? So first, we all need to know that it is not true that God creates souls together with bodies. Bodies are not really created. we know that, like, you can't really create new matter in this world. The bodies are just a combination of matter that already exists. The soul also is not created. There was nothing that God created new after the 6 days of creation. Nowhere. After the 6 days of creation, whatever existed then exists today and will exist forever. There is nothing new that was ever created. That includes physical and spiritual. No new malachim, no new neshamas, no new rocks, no new trees, no new nothing. You could rearrange the matter, maybe even spiritual matter. You can take it apart and rearrange it differently. So you can take the elements that make a cell and add some food and add some milk and add some water and add everything. The thing grows, but there's nothing new created. So neshamas are not created as people are born. There's something called the oitzer haneshamas, the treasury of souls. The Zohar HaKadosh brings it. He says, before God creates people, their souls exist in something called the oitzer haneshamas. God tells the neshama, go into that ruach, go into that person, go into that body, and the neshama goes into the body, and as it's going to fulfill its mission by joining with the body, God tells it, you should know your job in this world is to work hard in Torah and to learn Torah and to do mitzvahs. The Oitzer HaNeshamas is mentioned in a few places in the Zohar HaKadosh, and interestingly enough, it's also mentioned in Rashi in Masechta Yevamis. Rashi didn't have the Zohar. No, we assume Rashi didn't have the Zohar. The Zohar was found, we don't know exactly, maybe the Ramban found it. Around then, the Rashi and the Rambam, through the Rambam's times, they didn't have the Zohar. However, you will find many times in the Rambam, and here we'll find one in Rashi too, that the source for what they say is in the Zohar and nowhere else. And there are two explanations for this. Either, well, let's say the Rambam, for instance, he knew it the same place the Zohar knew it, and Zohar has to have a source too. So he knew it the same way the Zohar knew it. Or two, the Rambam and the Rishonim had different midrashim that we don't have anymore. Midrashim not necessarily all in our possession. And there could have been another place that the Rishonim knew it that we don't have it. But if you look at Rashi in Yevamis, Daf Samech Beis Amud Aleph, there's a machlokes in the Gemara over here. If a person has children and then they die, whether he fulfills pruvu like that. The Gemara says as follows. Itmar, there was a machlokes. Hayuloi bonum vamesu. The person had children and they died. Rav Huna Omar kayim pirya varivya. Rav Huna says he fulfilled pruvu. Rabbi Yochanan Omar loy kayim. Rabbi Yochanan says he didn't fulfill pruvu. Rav Huna Omar kayim. Rav Huna says he fulfilled pruvu. Why? Mishum Ravasi. Diyam Ravasi, because Ravasi says Ein ben David ba. Mashiach does not come. Ad sheyichlu kol haneshamas shebaguf, until all the neshamas are taken out of the guf and put where they belong. And since these neshamas, even though the children died, they were taken out of the guf, they did something in this world, they did enough for pruvu to be considered fulfilled. Now, what in the world does it mean they were taken out of the guf? Says Rashi, Kaloimar, Taima de Pirya Varivya, the reason for pruvu, or really the tam for pruvu, Mishum de Ravasi, is because of what Ravasi said. V'hai, Kevan de Notlu al Yodoi, Minishomai Sheba Oisoi Oitze, since this person who had these children took these neshamas out of the treasure house, out of the treasury, Sheshemoi Guf, whose name is Guf, Harikai Mitzvah Pirya Varivya, he fulfilled pruvu. So there are some Oitzer neshamas. The name of the Oitzer neshamas is called Guf. And when the Gemara says Mashiach doesn't come until all the neshamas are taken out of the Guf, it means all the human beings that were destined to be born will be born. They say the Vilna Gaon had suggested, or he was considering the idea of, or he was considering the downside of Chayrim Jarbeinu Gershom. The person only has one wife. He said it's Ma'akev the Gula, because the slower the children come down, the longer it takes for Mashiach to come, because Ein Ben David Bach, Yichla Kol Neshama Shebeguf. And then Rashi discusses it again on Samach Gimel Amud Beis. Guf, says Rashi, Hargud shechoitzeitz ben shchina l'malochim. It's a machitza, like a curtain, that separates the shchina from the malachim. Of course, this is all metaphorical, it's not literally a curtain. V'sham ruchois u'neshamois nesunois shenivro misheshis yimei habereshis. You hear? There, the neshamois and the ruchois are contained, that were created from sheshis yimei bereshis, in the 6 days of creation. Ha'asidois lihinosein begufim ha'asidim lihiboris, that are destined to be put inside the bodies that will be created later. So the neshamas always existed. The neshamas are the people that will be born. The neshamas are the people that were born. Neshamas are the people that are born. These neshamas were created on the 6 days of creation, and they were placed in bodies later. When the Ramchal says, Nimshechu bo b'toich hazera, they are taken and placed inside the zera, that's what he means. They're taken and placed from there. Yes?
You say created, you mean yesh me'ayin?
No. Normally the word bria means yesh me'ayin. In Chumash, the word bria is only used when it refers to yesh me'ayin. Yetzira or asiya, some other lashon means always yesh me'yesh. Rashi is not using it in quite that literal sense. He means the bodies that are destined to be created from whatever matter they are composed of. The matter was already created. In the sense that it's a body, it was never here.
No, I'm talking about the neshama now.
No, the neshama was created in the 6 days of Bereshis, Yesh Miyayin, like everything else. It sits there in the Yotzer HaNeshamas, waiting for God to say, you go into that body. You go into that zera. You go into that embryo.
There's some tablets, I think the Lubavitch is conducted in about where
this idea that the neshama is a chelik eloi kamim, number one, it's not referring to the neshama that we're referring to now. It's not referring to the Nefesh HaBahamas. And number two, it's in the Zohar, it's in the Ramban, it's actually, it's quoted from the Zohar. But it's in the Ramban, but it's quoted in the name of the Zohar, that the neshama is a chelik eloi kamimal, but it's not in the Zohar. You won't find it in the Zohar. There are places you could look from top to bottom, it's not there. There are places that you can interpret the Zohar to mean that, but the words that are quoted, man de nafach medilei ka nafach, that vayipach biyapav nishmas chayim, that God blew into Adam a breath of life, and he who blows from inside himself. You're not going to find that in the Zohar. I'll tell you where it is. It's in the Sefer HaPliya. That's where it is, which is just as good. But it's quoted, the Tani quotes it from the Zohar. The Zohars that we have, it's not there. Or maybe he had some kind of interpretive quote there. But it's in the Sefer HaPliya, it's in the Ramban, it's in the Rishonim, it's all over the place. This quote. The Ramban in a few places quotes it. But we're not talking about this neshama. We're talking about the neshama aliyah. Now we're talking about the same neshama that simply animals have. Life force, that's right. The Ramban in a few places himself mentions clearly that the neshamas were created a long time ago. Me'oz, he says. And he quotes the Chazal, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'nafshay sehem shel tzadikim nimlach. When God created the world, he Kivyochel took advice, he asked advice from the neshamas of the tzaddikim. That means the neshamas of the tzaddikim were there. That's what the Ramban says. He says, V'toyei ruach, yachshavu ki haneshamas nivros b'chol yoim ish ba'otzroi. Ramban says that people who make mistakes, they think that God creates the souls as people are created. It's not true. Because God currently does not make yesh me'ayin, nothing, not since 6 days of Bereshis. The Rambam writes that in several places. And other Rishonim write it also. Rabbeinu Bachai writes that the neshamas were created in the first day of the Bria. Rashi said during the 6 days of creation, but he didn't fill us in which of those 6 days we're talking about. Other Rishonim say the neshamas were created in the first day. Well, it's a good question. Question is, if the first day before they even went into a guf, they're referred to as the neshamas of tzaddikim, then when it goes into a guf, then how could that person be a rasha? There are a lot of answers. It could be that you could take the neshama of a tzaddik and make it into a rasha. You could say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu looked into the future and knew which tzaddikim, which neshamas through their bechibur would end up neshamas of tzaddikim. A lot of different possibilities. But what's definitely true is that the neshamas were created during the 6 days and not afterwards. Both the neshamas of the tzaddikim and the neshamas of the rishayim. What the Medrash exactly means when he says he consulted the neshamas of the tzaddikim, how could they be tzaddikim? There are several possibilities. But it's not for now. Now, the Ramchal said, Nimshechu bo b'toich hazera acharei kol toy. After conception, the neshama goes into the zera. Now, we need to know that there are different levels of neshama that enter into the body during different phases. There's the famous Gemara in Sanhedrin, where Antinoinus asks Rebbe, Me'emasai nitna biyodam, neshama. When is the neshama placed in a person? Mishas Pekida or Mishas Yitzira? Yitzira is the time of conception. Pekida means when the Malach takes that Zera to Hashem and asks, will it be a man or a woman? Will it be poor or rich? Doesn't say, will it be a tzaddik or a rasha? But all the non-Bechira aspects of this soul are decreed before conception, when it's still Zera. So, does it have the soul starting then, or does it have the soul later? Amar Loi, so Rebbe told him, Mishas Yitzira, from time of conception. Amar Loi, he said to him, Efshe chaticha shel baso imedesh shlosh yomim bloi melach ve'ina masreches? Can a piece of meat last 3 days without salt, without putrefying? And if it's true that the zera, even before there's a conception, has no neshama, it should putrefy. So the Rebbe said, Amar Zeh, Elo Mishas Pekida. The neshama goes in from the time of Pekida. Amar Rebbe, Davar Zeh Lamdeni, Antinoinus. I learned this from Antinoinus, and he had a pasuk to back it up. Mikra Misayeyoi. So there is some kind, at least, as Machloik is exactly what that Gemara is referring to. We'll go into it later. But suffice it to say for now, that there is some level of neshama, of spirit that the human being gets b'shas pekida. Then there's the Alshich. The Alshich says that the neshama is placed in the body 3 days after conception. The Maral says that the neshama is not it's not exactly in the zera, but in the zera, the zera has some power, it has some koyach, some ability to accept the neshama. That's why when somebody, hashchasa zera, is called shvichas domim. Because in the zera, even though there's no soul, it's not really murder, but since there's some kind of power there that gives the zera potential to become a soul or to accept a soul, in that sense it's called shvichas damim. So there is something, some kind of spiritual element, either the seat of the soul in the zera, something to that effect. But the neshama itself only comes, like the Ramchal says, achrei kol toy.
what they have to do. Whether they get it, they keep it or not, that's one problem.
Yeah, but if there'd be more wives, then they'd have more opportunities. No, but if there's more wives, there's more kids, and the and the neshama itself, the neshama itself. There's other place. There's a Gemara in Menachos that says that the neshama is placed in the child 40 days after conception, and obviously these are different levels of neshama, and there are halachic ramifications to this. Regarding if you kill an uber, under what circumstances can you do it? And if you do it, what's your status? What's the status of the killer? And it has to do with all of these factors when the neshama is put in. But a human being has a much higher level of intellect than all of them. However, in any case, all of this happens through this nefesh, through this life force, according to its natural aspects. According to the peripheral physical elements of each species according to what it is. God plants in each species a formula to become whatever it's supposed to become. In the nefesh of a person, and again this is talking about the life force, the lower soul, there are many aspects, there are many abilities. Kagoin hadimyan, the imagination, hazikaron, the memory, haseichel, the intelligence, vaharatzain, desire. Kulam koichos banefesh. All of these are functions, abilities of this nefesh. Mugbolim, bigvulim yaduim, defined and limited by their various limitations. Upoilim b'drachim yuchodim, and each one of them works individually. Now, the Ramchal here means several things. Number one, when he says poilim b'drachim yuchodim, that all of these things function individually, he means that the zikaron is not the seichel, and the seichel is not the rotzen, and the rotzen is not the dimyan. We learned last year about Hashem, that where Hashem is concerned, there are no aspects. There's no composite nature. So by Hashem, even though we say Hashem obviously doesn't forget anything, and Hashem obviously is not ignorant of anything, and Hashem obviously is not incapable of doing anything, nevertheless, it's not that Hashem has different aspects, that he has a memory, and that he has an intelligence, let's say, but rather we remember things with our memory, and we think with our intelligence, and we imagine things with our imagination. By HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not that way. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, let's say, you'd say he would think of things with his imagination, remember things with his intelligence, then really there is no intelligence, there's no imagination, there's nothing, there's just one entity, it's Hashem. He's kuloi poshut. There's no composite nature, because that would make him quantifiable. By human beings, however, they are composite. And just like we said, that everything in this world is composite. It's composed of the four yesodis. It's comprised of form and substance. It's made out of different things. That is the nature of all physical things that exist in the universe. They're composite. They're made out of more than one aspect. At the very least, you have form and substance that has to get together and to create something physical. But as a rule, all physical things are made up of other things. They're composite. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu not. Now the Ramchal is saying that this neshama produces a composite effect on the body. It's not that the neshama functions in one way. This nefesh habahamis, in combination with the nature of the body, produces various different abilities. And one ability does not encroach upon the other ability. Yeah.
I understand that these are one Hashem, but why does it have to be separate in human beings? Otherwise, why the time might continue to do and etc. And then why they should be independent, interdependent. They depend on each other.
Say again, please.
Otherwise, you say Hashem dimions Yikar Sefer Ratzon Olecha.
Right.
Not the separation between them.
Right.
So that's Hashem is a thought.
Mm-hmm.
That's that. But for the human, why does it have to be 4 different faculties? Why is it that Sefer and Dimion, Sefer would contribute to Dimion, Dimion is Yikar would contribute to Dimion. What do we insist that for man it has to be different?
It didn't have to be that way. That's the way Hashem made it. That's all. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to. That's the way Hashem made it. The way Hashem made the world is that the world is in general, all physical things are made up of other things. It has to be that the world can't be echad, because if the world, the physical thing would be echad, it would be Hashem. When we say Hashem echad, we mean a physical thing can't be echad. Imagine a physical thing that has no attributes, no form, no substance, no inside, no outside. That's Hashem. It's not a physical thing. A physical thing by definition is a creation. That's what the nature of creations are. Now, why, you're going to ask me why it has to be 4 attributes and not 6 attributes, 6 and not 8. That's all the Ratzon Hashem. It's like saying, why does a person have 10 fingers and not 20? I don't know. Hold on, we get there. It's not only those things, there's more than that. But he only brought 4. Now, this, we know that the taiva of a person is a function of the nefesh. Rav Sajigoin says, because it says, Kisaiva nafshecha. When your nefesh would desire something, it's the nefesh, it's not the body, that's in charge of the power of desire, the nefesh habahamis in any case. The Rav Sajigoin says that desire, taiva, is from the nefesh, kas, anger, is from the ruach, and intelligence is from the neshama. In the Zohar it says that a person has 3 koiches, or 3 neshamas. One is the koich of the neshama hakadosha, the other one is the neshama of the taiva, and the other one is the neshama of the movement. Now again, we mentioned earlier that in learning this subject, you will see the neshama divided up into various different parts in various different ways. They're not necessarily a contradiction. It's like saying a house is divided up into upstairs and downstairs, has 2 parts. You can also say a house is divided up into 10 rooms. You can also say a house is divided up into 4 sections, north, south, east, and west. You can say a house is divided up into inside and outside. They're all true. So if somebody asks you, how many parts does a house have? The question has no meaning, unless you want to know, it says upstairs, downstairs, inside, outside, different parts referring to different rooms. So when we see different parts to the neshama, or different parts of the neshama doing different things, they're not necessarily contradicting each other, because they're all interrelated. Says the Ramchal in Das Tfunois, Hagufu bal chalokim veivarim protiyim, v'tashmishim protiyim ugbolim. The guf has many parts, and each part does a different thing. Avol haneshama, haloi lefi atzma hi inyan echad, chutz mikol inyone haguf legamri. The neshama is all one thing, totally different and separate from the guf. V'chol deracheho heim drochem acherim, shoyne midarkei haguf, bakol mikol kol. The ways of the neshama are completely different than the ways of the guf. It's a different nature, it's a different function, different dynamics, totally. Afilu binyonei ha'argeshim atzma, even regarding actual feelings. But the fact is that the neshama causes all the activities of the guf when it's in the guf. Hi hashoimas be'oznei haguf. The neshama, the nefesh, hears through the ears of the body. Hi haroya be'einei haguf. It's the neshama that sees, the nefesh that sees through the eyes of the body. V'chein kol kiyotze b'zeh. Halchein nikra roya shoimas. V'chol shar kinun. There are many nicknames we have for neshamas. If you want a list, I have a list. Reuven Margolis made a list. And some kunshris, nefesh ruach neshama is one of his svarim. But 2 of the nicknames are roya or shoimas. Neshama sees, neshama hears. That's really the eyes that hair, the ears that hair. What's happening is that the nefesh is hairs through the ears, and the nefesh sees through the eyes. It's not that the nefesh allows the eyes to see. It's the nefesh that sees through the eyes. It's kind of trapped in this guf, and it's forced to use the kalim of the guf in order to function. But it's not that the neshama has different functions of hearing and seeing. It's not the way the neshama works. That's the neshama kind of filtered through a guf. Even though the neshama is the visionary here, it's the neshama that sees. The guf is just dirt. The guf is just a doimim. That's all it is. This is not really the way a neshama sees. The neshama on its own functions in a completely different way than the body. When a human being is in a body, or a human being is alive, a human being can't even imagine this. We mentioned many times that the human mind doesn't create its own knowledge. It just collects knowledge from the outside, rearranges it, and makes things out of it. But if something that we never experienced, we can't imagine. The classic example is you have a blind person. He can never imagine light. There's no way you'll be able to explain to somebody who was born blind the difference between blue and red. You won't do it. And so too, on paper, the blind person, though, can prove that there's light out there. He'll be able to prove there's a difference between blue and red, but he won't understand what it means. It'll be gibberish to him, even though on paper it works. So too, we understand there are things. I know if somebody tells you infinity, we can't understand what that means. What does it mean? Say space never ends. It drives kids crazy in school when the teacher says that. What do you mean it never ends, teacher? Well, it can't not end. Or it's worse. The teacher says, all right, so space ends. Just made it worse, not better. That you can't imagine. If space ends, then what happens? It's constantly expanding universe. That's very nice. So what's beyond the expansion? All of these things we could prove on paper, but we cannot imagine. So too, the fact that a neshama functions in a way different than the guf, we could prove on paper, so to speak. But there's no way that we're going to conceptualize that. But because it functions the neshama through the eye, therefore we refer to the eye as the thing that sees. But the rule is, the neshama is a type of creation, completely different, dissimilar to the guf in all ways, totally. It is created with, and within its nature is the ability to animate and give function to all the body's evorim, according to the nature of those evorim. That's why we say the neshama is what's hearing, the neshama is what's seeing, but it's not really what's happening. It's like a mushal. It's analogous to Hashem. It's not comparable, it's analogous to Hashem. Because Hashem has midas, we know. And when we say Hashem has midas, it doesn't really mean Hashem possesses midas. Hashem is comprised of midas. Or Hashem possesses midas. That's not what we mean. Hashem doesn't possess anything. There's nothing superimposed on him. There's no measurable way to describe him. There's no quantifiable things about him. There's no midas. But rather, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does things, the result of which seems like certain midas, seems like they're the result of certain midas, and that's how we refer to Hashem's midas. And so too with the neshama. The neshama also doesn't really have separate functions. This that the Ramchal says that the neshama causes the separate functions. It doesn't mean those functions are functions of the neshama. It means they're functions of the guf, which is animated through the neshama. As far as the statement that the Ramchal made, that the nefesh is in charge of the intellect and the feelings of a person. There's Ramak that says that there are 4 spiritual aspects of a person: seeing, hearing, smelling, and speaking. And he says, even though that some of these things are functions of the nefesh habahamis, there's no question that the ability to smell and to hear and to see that an animal has is similar to that of a person. And it's no question that the seichel of a person is different than the seichel of an animal. And Vaharaya, he says, speech is the proof. Because speech of an animal is just sounds that they make. Moo, meow, yap, yippity yap. The animals, they don't have a language. Not really a language. When it says Shlomo HaMelech knew the language, it doesn't mean it's a language. It makes no sense. It's not really words. Just imagine, even Pete doesn't make any sense. I mean, just think about it. I mean, people, even human beings, don't understand the language of other human beings unless they're taught it. For an American in China, they won't understand one word he's saying. There has to be an educational system to teach people language. It's not a natural thing. Animals, even if you're going to say that animals have language, like if you take a horse from China and you give him the horse in Africa, how in the world is he going to know the language of the African horse? The whole thing doesn't make any sense. It's not language. It's not words. Words are creation of an intellect. The animals, they don't have language. They have like body language, I guess you could say. And even though humans have different body language, where they are, more or less, but there's a big common denominator. Animals just have grunts and growls, and it's not speech, it's not language in any sense of the word that we refer to human language as language. Human language are words that were created by the intellect of a person, different sounds to mean different concepts. They were creations of a person, or Lashon HaKodesh given by Hashem, whatever it is, but they are intellectual symbols, they are verbal symbols that you need an intellect to interpret. Animals don't have that ability. They can't make languages, it's a universal language of the species. We use language very loosely in this way. So it's not nearly the same as a person. So even though human beings have a language and animals, kivyochel, in some sort of way have a language, it's totally not the same thing. So too when we say human being has nefesh habahamis and animals have a nefesh habahamis, we have different functions. But we have the same kind of functions, but they're really totally different. Now it's very interesting, the Ramchal wrote that even amongst animals there's difference in their intellect and everything. The Sefer Ikrim writes that, there are four types of things in the world. Doimim, Tzomeach, Chai, Medaber. Doimim is a rock, Tzomeach is a plant, animals are Chai, and human beings are Medaber. So the Sefer Ikrim says they're kind of like links between the species. Kind of like missing links, that link them. He says the sponge is like in between the Doimim and the Tzomeach. It's not quite a tzemeach, not quite a doiming. That's what he says. I'm sorry, it's not the sponge. It's the, what do you call that thing? The sea anemone. A thing that like grows on the bottom of the ocean. It has these tentacle type things. What? It looks like a mushroom that somebody chopped off the top a lot and made it and shredded the top. Looks like a mushroom that somebody shredded the top. That's what he says. It's like a sea plant. Right? It's like a sea plant. So he says that's like a between Doimim and Tzomeach. He says the sponge in the ocean, like.
You see them in these rapes, you see the starfish.
Mm-hmm. a sponge is between tzomeach and chai. It's not quite a chai, but it's not quite a tzomeach. It's like above a tzomeach, less than a chai, he says. And guess what he says is between the chai and the medaber, between animals and a person. Monkeys. He says monkeys are between animals and people. No. So there are different levels of Daimim Tzameach Chai Medaber, and they're in between. Now when we say Rotzen, when the Ramchal says that the Rotzen is a function of the Nefesh HaBahamis, there are two types of Rotzen. He doesn't mean the Rotzen Sichli. There's a desire there's a desire that animals have, to do things, maybe to protect themselves, maybe, survival instincts. That's what we're talking about the Rotzen over here. But the Rotzen Sichli is a different story. The Rotzen Sichli is somebody who wants good because it's good, or maybe somebody wants bad because it's bad. But the ability to distinguish between good and bad, between things that are healthy and not healthy, to stay away from things that are dangerous and not dangerous. Animals don't have that. Animals don't know if, an animal wouldn't know if smoking causes cancer or not. They wouldn't want to stay away from a cigarette because it causes cancer. They have some kind of natural survival instincts, but it's not an intellectual, assessment of what's good for it or bad for it. Human beings have, a intellectual rotzen, which is a function of bechira, that a person chooses what to do to himself and for himself. That type of desire, a person only wants to be good, that we're not talking about over here. That's a different story. So now, one more thing, this Nefesh HaBahamis, giving kind of a preview, we're jumping a bit, but it's good to know what happens to the Nefesh HaBahamis at the end of the day. At the end of the day, when a person dies, the Nefesh HaBahamis ends up in the ground together with the guf. The Nefesh HaBahamis is a physical entity. As we said, it's created out of two of the elements that exist in the world, two of the four elements. It's a physical entity. It's very sublime, it's very non-tangible, but it's a physical entity. And as a physical entity, it doesn't end up in the olam haneshamas. It doesn't end up upstairs. It ends up downstairs with the body. And the Svarim actually bring a posuk in Koheles. Now, I'm quoting a posuk in Koheles as the Medrash Tanchuma quotes it, which is not exactly the way it's written in Koheles. The Medrash Tanchuma, Vayikra Oisches, says, one of the reasons for karbonis is to distinguish between a human being and an animal. Lahavdiloi min habehema, shloi tered nafsho lishol tachtis k'moi habehema, sheyoredes nafsho lamata lioretz. That a person's neshama should not go down to the earth like an animal's nefesh. The nefesh habahamis of an animal goes down, ends up in the earth. K'moi shenemar, like it says in the posuk in Koheles, mi yoideya nefesh ha'odam ha'oilahi lamala. The soul of a person, or the spirit of a person, the nefesh of a person, rises up. V'nefesh habahema hayoredes hi lamata. But the nefesh of an animal gets lowered below down. Now, in Koheles, it's Kapitel Gimel Pasuk Chafal, if it actually says, Mi yoideya ruach b'nei odom, ha'oilahi lamala, v'ruach habehema hayoredes hi lamata. In any case, as I said, the words nefesh, ruach, you're going to see them interchangeably. And here's a very, very strong example of interchangeable words. The Medrash is quoting a pasuk one way, which is not the way it actually says so in the pasuk. Now, the Svarim bring this pasuk, nefesh habehema yeredes lamata, to show that the nefesh habahamis, even if a person goes down to the ground, it doesn't end up in olam haneshamas. because it's a physical thing. Because the nefesh habahamis of a person and the nefesh habahamis of an animal, even though they're on different levels, they're both nefesh habahamis, and they're both physical things, and they both end up in the ground. Forget about, listen. Forget about Gilgulim for now. Forget about Gilgulim, even you don't have to forget about them for now, you can forget about them for a long time. But that's not the topic here. Now, right now we're just talking about the Nefesh HaBahamis. Nefesh HaBahamis goes down to the ground, the Nefesh HaElyoina goes up. And the Nefesh HaBahamis is really what animates the Guf, it gives it its taiva, and the war between the Guf and the Neshama, as we're going to see, is actually a war between the Nefesh HaBahamis and the Neshama HaElyoina. That's what it is. The Guf, the Nefesh HaBahamis, you could think of it as part of the body. You could think of it as part of the body. It's a bodily attribute. And it gives the body its desire, it gives the body its animation, it gives the body its spiritual aspects. But it's all physical, it's animal spiritual aspects, emotional aspects, intellectual aspects in an animal sense. Now questions, are there any questions left? Right.
Torah, or maybe it's just the power of Nevi'im that they could do this. Had in Hazonish that he could see the Ruach or Sali that one time some person comes in and say, get out of here.
Question, if the Ramchal said last week, he didn't say it last week, we repeated it last week. If the Ramchal was quoted last week as saying that the neshama is not you can't sense it, you can't feel it, it's not measurable or tangible in any way whatsoever, how is it that certain tzaddikim were able to recognize things on people beyond what we could recognize? The answer is they didn't see the neshama as such. A person's actions have an effect on their body as well. A person's face, for instance, in certain ways that I wouldn't be able to tell you, but it says that it's true. It reflects what's inside the person. Now we are able to recognize if a person's angry or if a person's happy, or if a person's depressed or sad based on his facial expressions. But there is a more complex and involved way to read people's faces or other parts of people that are able to indicate spiritual status of a person, various different things. It doesn't mean that you could actually see with your eyes a person's neshama. That doesn't happen. You don't need to see the neshama. Remember, neshama is connected to the nefesh habahamis, which is connected to the guf. It's all interrelated. There's a domino effect over here. We don't know exactly how or what, but there are ways to be able to recognize this. Yeah.
It could be the neshama that affects physically, because for instance, they've done in numerous magazines and newspapers. They put a picture of a person before he committed a murder, then afterwards, and you can literally see a big difference. Could that possibly be the neshama that affected him physically? There is a difference.
Well, it could be the fact that there's like hands are splattered with blood. They're able to tell or something. No. You're asking me why a guy who just murdered somebody looks different than somebody who didn't in pictures? The same person? Listen, I don't know. I know that when they bring a murder defendant to trial, that wouldn't be considered proof, would it? No, it wouldn't. And I'm sure that in 99.9999% of the cases, the pictures wouldn't be different. If in some magazine they had some article, first of all, shouldn't be reading such magazines. Junk. Secondly, who knows if what it says is true. Thirdly, if what it says is true, it has nothing to do with anything that we're learning here tonight. That's all physical stuff. Has nothing to do with the neshama. Absolutely zero. A question. Right, like question. First, in general, what's the point of creating categories? What's the difference how many neshamas we have? What's the difference how many nefashos we have? And two, especially if we're dealing with machloikesin, and if a daimim has a nefesh, if a tzomeach has a nefesh, why do we need to know this? Right, basically like that. If there's an afkamina in halacha, actually sometimes there is. Remember last week we were talking the neshama Yisera on Shabbos, if you want to understand what it is. The neshama that goes up at night and comes down, if you want to understand what it is. All these things are Torah. And in general, it's Torah. It's not just metaphysics, it's all Torah here. That's Pshat and Pasuk in Koheles we just learned. That the Nefesh HaBahamis goes down. Well, what is the Nefesh HaBahamis? What does it do? What's Pshat in the Pasuk? All this comes to us through Torah. All this is from the Zohar, from Chazal, from Psukim, and it's part of learning Torah. If you want to know if there's an afkamina lahalacha, usually there's not. Sometimes there is, like differences in the neshama, differences regarding the halachas of abortions. By the way, depend upon that Gemara that we said about at what point in time does the neshama enter into the body. Before 40 days, there's a lot more flexibility al pi din than after 40 days because of that. And, various things like that. So there are nafkaminas, but even if they are not, these are psukim, these are midrashim, this is for us to know. Now, also, as long as we ask the question, I may as well tell you that in the Svarim of the Rishonim, they considered it extremely important, vital, to learn from all the limudim, to learn and understand about the neshama. First understand yourself and then you can understand God. The neshama in Chazal is given as a mashal for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's actions in this world. There's a lot that we could learn about Hashem and about the Torah from the neshama. The neshama is actually the closest thing to Hashem that exists in the world. And as we go later on, we're going to see a lot about what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did in the world through what Hashem did in the neshama. The Medrash Tanchuma is the first place that I know of that calls a human being a microcosm of the universe. Olam HaKoten. And the human being is a microcosm. If you want to understand how the universe works, how everything works, you have to look at a human being. The Ramchal mentions that if you know to look at, in Das Tfunos, it says even the physical body of a human being. Human being is created with doubles. 2 hands, 2 eyes, 2 hands, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 arms, 2 legs. What's with the 2s? She says it's because the world has always 2 forces, a right and a left, and each one means something. The human being is actually a marshal. Pasuk says, "Mibsari echze Hashem." You could see Hashem through you. That's your guf. The neshama surely. But before we get to the Musar part, we have to get the Yisoidis. You mentioned the Ramchal and Derech Hashem in particular. It's the only sefer that you're going to find like this that was not talking to any particular need. It was not addressing any particular need. He was not addressing the Nevuchim of Klal Yisrael. He was not addressing Chasidus. He was not addressing Tzadikim. He was not addressing his particular Talmidim. This is mamish, meat and potatoes, basic Judaism. That's what this sefer is about. It's true that in the first chapter he said there's a mitzvah to know, mitzvah deiraisa, kol ish Yisrael tzorich leida. Everybody has to know about Hashem. This doesn't go in that category. It's not a mitzvah deiraisa to know this, in that sense. But it's a mitzvah to know Torah, and this is part of Torah. And in particular, this particular part of Torah is extremely useful and even vital in knowing other parts of Torah. There are svarim written specifically on this topic. The Chayvus Halvavus wrote a sefer Torah Sanefesh, just on the neshama. Tagmulei HaNefesh, Olam HaKoten. There are so many svarim written just on the topic of a neshama. Probably more Hegyon HaNefesh, probably more than any other topic in the world. It's the topic of the neshama is discussed. There's so many svarim that start off with the topic of the neshama. Let's start off with what's in neshama. Because das atzmucha v'da'acha kach das elokei avicha. And as we go on, we're not going to touch too much into the halacha l'maisa of this, but we're going to mention as we go along. Okay.
In terms of awareness of nefesh, ruach, neshama, you mentioned briefly that the desire is based on nefesh, kas is based on ruach, and the intelligence is the effect of neshama. You see in the pasuk, and I don't know, maybe that's where it's interchangeable, as you mentioned. Many times nefesh is used. I'm sure for sure.
Yeah, well, nefesh, it is interchangeable. In the Torah, nefesh is used to mean a person.
Like, it says ruach acheret.
No. They have multiple meanings. Ruach acheret.
Not very frequently ruach is...
It doesn't matter. There are multiple meanings. Nefesh is used to mean a person. Shivim nefesh, right? Ruach acheres means a different idea. It's ruach also means the wind, right? They mean different things, and they're interchangeable. But one thing you do need to know: the word neshama is used nowhere in Tanakh except regarding people. Nefesh is nefesh kol chai. Nefesh is used regarding animals. Neshama you will only find in Tanakh regarding a human being. That's because neshama is in the legal translation of neshama. It means only what a human being has. Everything else is nefesh and ruach, and it's very interchangeable.
Neshama is the intelligence that you mentioned.
In neshama is more. It's the neshama ha'elyon. It's not just the intelligence. The neshama is.
What is the most important part of intelligence? Is that the planning is part of the intelligence?
As not the
What is about the intelligence that makes a human...
bechira. The most important part of intelligence is bechira. For you to choose right from wrong.
Planning is part of that?
It depends what you plan. It depends what you plan. If you plan, it's not the same planning. They're not planning with free will. It's some kind of instinctive, programmatic planning. You can program a robot to plan also. You can program a robot to take into consideration various different what ifs, what suggestions, various different things, and it runs a program, and then it comes up with an idea. Theoretically, you can't program it to do completely random, but you can program it to be unpredictable. To program something to be random is an oxymoron. You can't program something random. What they do when they program random numbers and stuff, they do tricks like they'll tell the computer, they'll ask the computer will find out what time is it and how many seconds have elapsed in the last minute. And they'll use that number as a random number or something. It's not really random. There's a cheshbon behind it. You can't program something to do something random. But it's mechanical, and animal instincts could plan, but it's not the same as human planning. They can make decisions, but it's not the same as human decisions. It's robotic, it's mechanical, it's instinctive. It's not bechira. Bechira is not part of Nefesh HaBahamis. Bechira is the Neshama HaElyoina, endows us with bechira. Animals don't have bechira, and even we only have bechira regarding 613 things. Bechira is, we said, the Ramchal said, the Nefesh HaBahamis controls physical functions, physical desires, physical thinking, physical thought, things like that. Bechira, all things spiritual that have to do with Hashem, that's the